How heavily should we rely on the data? Data, something or other. I don't know how to pronounce that. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. And obviously, these posts have gotten a little less frequent than day to day. I've had some stuff going on, nothing crazy. I don't know that any of you care, but if you did, now you know. I saw a post today from Candace Owens, formerly of the Daily Wire, now independent. And she shared a clip in the post of Andrew Tate. Now, granted, anything Andrew Tate says should be taken with the largest grain of salt you can find. And if you find a large grain of salt and use that grain of salt, I would recommend finding a bigger one. He went into this sort of rant that he doesn't need data, he has street smarts. Now, granted, this is coming from the man who's currently under investigation for many, many crimes in Romania, of all places. I don't even know what his deal is. Is he a British citizen? Is he. I don't know. What. He made his money from essentially abusing and exploiting women. I don't care if it was quote unquote cam girls who signed up and agreed to do the business. He abused and exploited women under any interpretation you want, especially of, for example, Christianity. But regardless, he mentioned data. Candace Owens chimed in. She doesn't always agree with the illustrious Andrew Tate, but in this case, she did. She was making the point about we don't need the data. Now, the larger point they were making, it was lost in Andrew Tate's tattoos, and it was lost in Candace Owens' agreement with Andrew Tate. But the larger point they were making was that the reason you can't trust the data is because the data is created by the people you don't trust. That in and of itself is an interesting point. But here's the summation for those of you who only watch the first 3 minutes of a video. Data was never meant to supplant our reasoning. It was meant to inform our reasoning. So if you ignore data, you're a fool. And if you only use the data to make a decision, you are also a fool. You are equally fools on both sides. If the data becomes too big a part of your decision one way or the other, positively or negatively. Let's start with you're a fool if you ignore the data. First things first. This widespread assumption of corruption in the world. Corruption requires a large-scale amount of people to be working in sync. And I'm not saying the drug company working with the government I'm not even saying that large scale. I'm saying let's take a government agency, the EPA. The EPA publishes data all the time. They're collecting a lot of data all the time. But let's say the EPA, we assume corruption at the EPA. To assume corruption at the EPA, we have to assume administration to administration to administration to administration, that the people who work at the EPA have a consistent enough plan where they are able to be corrupt. To be corrupt, you must have a plan, and you must be executing on that plan. And not only that, but not be found out. Corruption cases in court are exciting because of how rare they are, but not only how rare they are, because you're uncovering a lot of people working together in different places. But they're rare. It's hard to find that many corruption cases because you have to be actively working together. Which is why they say never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence. And in the case of large government agencies, incompetence takes nobody working together. In fact, it takes the opposite. It takes 300 different people in 300 different departments with 300 different sets of rules trying to bring everything together all the time and try to make everything work. That sounds a little bit more like our modern government bureaucracy, doesn't it? It sounds completely incompetent. It's not better, but it's not a crime. It's not a crime to be stupid, but it's not any better than being corrupt. Now, that being said, you're a fool if you ignore the data that is collected from agencies and drug companies and whatnot, because it says something. It indicates something to us. We ignored a lot of data in the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that bit us in the ass. What data did we ignore? We ignored the rising number of cases. Now, did we need to panic as hard as we did after we got, bitten in the ass? Probably not. We're not horses being bit by a horsefly. We probably could have been bitten, said, ow, okay, we need to come up with a plan here, a plan of action. We need to close for 2 weeks and then come up with a plan of action. The data should have informed our decision making, not supplanted our decision making. In this case, in the case of the pandemic, data 100% supplanted our decision making. We just went with whatever the latest weekly number said, and we didn't care where the number was coming from or how the number was calculated. And we know now that the numbers were not the best. We weren't collected the best because we were in the middle of a pandemic. We weren't exactly we were doing our best, but we weren't doing rigorous data calculation. Like, that wasn't the main focus. The main focus was the respiratory thing. But in the early days, we had a prediction. We sort of could have known we could have been aware of what was coming. But by the same token, and again, I hinted at it just a moment ago, the data can't supplant your decision making. If you simply lean on data so hard that it's the only thing you're thinking about, if the data set's no good, you crumble like a house of cards. Data sets aren't perfect. And they can't be. Human error means they're never going to be perfect. Survey questions are always going to be weirdly worded such that it's hard for people to answer those questions. Data we're collecting from a sample size, we pick a population size and we collect data from that population. We're making assumptions about that population. We're making assumptions about how that population projects outward. The biggest case is in the case of Hillary Clinton losing the 2016 election to Donald Trump. It was not predicted. The data did not say that was going to result. But the Democratic Party made decisions in their campaign based on that data. Basically, they didn't phone in the election, but they felt pretty confident. They weren't worried. They weren't necessarily reaching for that middle section of voters as hard as they maybe would have if they knew they were in a fight. Now, I'm not arguing politically one way or another in the 2016 election. I'm simply saying they supplanted their decision making with the data. They made a decision solely based on the data. They wrapped their arms around that data. They loved it. They cuddled it. They hoped it would keep them safe. At the end of the day, data are just numbers. You have to use them to influence decision making or as part of your decision making process. They're another data. This is weird to say, but data are just another data point in your decision making process. Don't rely on the data to save you. The data set could be bad. Frankly, the data set could be outdated. You could have made the data set based on information in 2017, and normally, 9 times out of 10, that's a fine predictor. A 4-year trail is normally a fine predictor. But in a lot of cases, it's not, or something drastic changes. You have to be aware of what's going on around you. Don't ignore data. That's bad. Don't let the data supplant your thinking. That's also bad. End of the day, use your rational thought. take in everything you can before you make a decision, but don't be paralyzed by any one part of that decision-making process. That's what I got. I'm out of time. I need more coffee. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a great day.